not part of the dominant culture and you never see yourself represented in textbooks or in any books or in TV or in anything positive, you want to grab everything that's yours, right? You want to say, oh yeah, she's ours. So then I found out that a lot of my black friends thought it was a black story. And you know, I thought, okay, so she's from the South Side, so you know, she belongs to everybody. As I got older, I noticed a big shift as our kids moved away from having storytelling with grandparents for entertainment, or even among themselves for entertainment, and to being receivers of culture through the TV. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, I saw more progressive movement away from hearing the traditional stories. And then I noticed in the 90s that the story of La Llorona and the Donkey Lady were being blended. I said, no, wait a minute, this one's the Donkey Lady, that one's La Llorona. They were mixing them all up. They were crossing back and forth. So at that point, I went to the oldest people I knew that had heard the story and asked them how young they were when they heard the story. So I could get some estimate of how old this went back. I knew we knew about it in the 50s. And from what I could tell, it happened at the latest in the 1930s. People who would say, oh yeah, I heard about this when how old were you when you first heard of it? Oh, I was about 12. And so I figured their birth dates and whatever. So it could be earlier, but it's at least back to the 1920s or 30s. There were only 3 facts in common between all of them. Because, you know, in some versions she dies, in some versions she lives and is terribly disfigured by the fire, and that's why she's called the Donkey Lady. But the 3 things that were in common, other than the story of the bridge that most San Antonians know, that if you go to that bridge, you just better watch out if you go there at night. It's become like the Angelito story on the railroad tracks. You know, everybody goes and tests it out and goes and checks it. She was of mixed race, is what I heard over and over again. Oh, she was black or Mexican, but they weren't sure. She was mixed. And that in itself became an insult, which I always thought was kind of odd. That why would you be upset if somebody has more races and there's more chance that they're related to you, right? And people didn't approach it that way. So anyway, it was the 50s and the 60s. But she was mixed race. She was vulnerable. She lived alone. She lived out far away in the rancho, and it was the people from around there who had killed her. So that was the story that I heard most of the time. But what fascinated me the most, because when you collect folklore, you have to find more than just, sometimes there aren't many words, many things that come out. You have to listen to everything, including the silences. When do they get quiet? What do they say and what do they not say? And so the earliest versions of it I heard was, La quemaron. They burnt her. And then they would either get quiet for a few seconds or they would say, Pobrecita. So there was compassion. So wait a minute. She's not the scary one. She's not the villain. She's the victim. And as we move forward and further away from the complete story, where people are just getting little pieces of the story, then it's easy to make, oh, it's a scary story, you got to make it scary so you can frighten the kids into behaving. You know, you better behave because she's going to get you. You know, that kind of thing. So I tried to listen to the silences, and then I had to fill in the gaps, because we fill in the gaps. These words are not her words. I don't know what her words were, but I was trying to fill it in from context. Thelma, you want to tell them about she did artistic research on it. She went out to the area.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to go at night for sure. But I do remember, you know, as a young child, my father used to drive us around. He was from the south area, close to Floresville, And he would share stories of the area and things that he had done and working in the fields as a farm worker. But he would, every once in a while mention that, oh, we're coming to the Donkey Lady Bridge. I said, well, what happened there? Why they call her Donkey Lady? He says, oh, she was badly burned. But we got a very brief, feeling about it. And it's something that it just stays with you, like, why? Why do they want to call it that? Why is she disfigured? How can she look like a donkey? Well, all those images from the past, and then also, maybe reading some of the stories that people publish about what they have experienced or make believe and fantasize about what had happened to her. All that sort of affected me, but there was something human about this story. It is a human story of a person who possibly died in a fire. How do I translate that? So that's how going down there and experiencing the area, feeling what the South Side is like, the countryside, and the little small homes that are around there, little tiny grocery stores, all those affected how I put it down on paper.
Thank you. Folklore, like Carmen was saying, these stories persist, and specifically the Donkey Lady story has persisted for generations and haunted the people of San Antonio and other parts for a long time. They persist for a reason, right? There's a reason that much like the corrido tradition from the old oral tradition, it goes through different changes, but they teach us certain things. They tell about our history, our culture. In this case, a parable, a story that's teaching us something. Another question or comment from the audience?
Do we ever know how old the lady was?
How old?
I have no idea, except she was old enough for them to complain about her not being married, so that I guess could be, what? Over 21, over 30? I don't know what that is, but whatever it is.
I must say that in some versions of the story, if you look up the Donkey Lady, some versions, a lot of different versions. This is a distinctive version, but some say that her husband killed her. Some say that it was a neighbor, an Anglo, that had hit the donkey that was owned by, I was going to say La Callada. We don't really even know her name, her real name per se, even though we know that it was a true story that some lady was burned and disfigured. I ask people nowadays, I say, have you heard the story of the Donkey Lady? And they, oh yeah. Well, what are the details? Well, I don't know. Right? It's interesting that people have heard of the Donkey Lady, but they don't know what really happened behind it. Of course, now it's got to mention they go to the Donkey Lady Bridge and they want to get spooked, right? They'll hear the braying of the donkey. It'll appear to them. Another question or comment? Yes, ma'am, back there. Could you be that a little bit louder because we can't hear?
Okay, I went down there. If you go straight out, actually you can find it in your Google Maps. It's on Google Maps. You go straight out Applewhite Road, and there's a small road, I think it's called Jetter or something. You turn, and then all of a sudden the street starts winding down to the river, which is the Medina River now. And you can cross it now. It is closed to a car. You can't drive across it, but you can walk it, and you can feel the countryside just by crossing that bridge.
Is it online under the Donkey Lady Bridge?
Yeah, you can look up the donkey. You can there's even pictures online of the Donkey Lady Bridge. However, I was told by the people with I think it's called Medina Area Restoration or Conservancy. I don't think anybody here from it, but they came to a sneak preview reading that we did. And first of all, they were stunned that Thelma had depicted it so perfectly, because they said, I know that building exactly, you know, that's where it happened. But they were, their feeling was that in the folklore of the people whose houses were still in that area, that they felt it was there. It had happened there. And that now whoever owns that land has closed it off because they're tired of people going invading the territory, trespassing and whatever. But that it had happened there. Whatever happened, happened there. What I wanted to add a little bit to the historical information is we have to remember that the late 1800s and the early 1900s were a time period where there was a lot of violence against people of color. I mean, this is like, those of you in Mexican American Studies and African American Studies are going to go, yeah, duh. But we forget that today, that there were lynchings and there were burnings, multiple stories. And in the folklore, I have encountered them and written about some of them, about a mojado that's working for a family, and everybody knows him as the mojado, the wetback. And he's making money to take back home to his sick parents. And he's on a small farm, and then he crosses the line. He falls in love with the sister and the three brothers. This is factual. Also, this was another piece of folklore, another small town in Texas. Usually it happens in a small town or in the ranches that are further out from the small town, because nobody's there to police anything. They're not under any jurisdiction. If there is a sheriff, he lives 30 miles away, and he's a good buddy, usually of the landowners. So if the landowners do something, no one else complains about it, even if a complaint is brought. And in this instance, a young man was going to marry the sister. She had told the brothers, I'm out of here. I'm tired of taking care of you guys. I'm heading off with him. And the brothers are furious at the thought that their sister is going to marry a Mexican. And they sneak into, he sleeps there on the ranch. He's their ranch hand. They sneak into where he's sleeping and they burn him alive. And somebody of his friends in the community goes to the sheriff, you know, and says, we heard what happened. We saw what happened. We saw in the distance the screaming and what was happening. And this, he doesn't exist. He doesn't have any papers. He's a wetback. Wetbacks don't exist. So that, we have to realize that at that time period, burning and lynching were not uncommon against people of color. So when they say it happened and it happened here, I tend to believe it.
Questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Don.
Carmen, how did you decide what to leave out?
Good question. Sometimes when you're writing and you get into a zone, you know, you're studying something, you've got all the facts present, you've got all the voices and all the versions present. You hope for a moment when something just drives you. When you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, I can hear it, I know what's happening. You're listening to the silences. And in the version that came, it just flowed out. I didn't have to take something larger and cut it down. I didn't write it like you write a lengthy report on the political situation in Georgia. You know, it wasn't a matter of collecting all this information and then piecing it together. I collected what we knew. I listened to the silences in the stories, the things we didn't know. And then at one moment I was lucky enough to hear it all together and just write that version down. It is a version. And people have to recognize that in folklore, once something becomes part of the common folklore, unless you have TV cameras or a written record by a reliable source, and even then, you know, it no longer belongs just to the facts, it belongs to the community. And in those time periods, we didn't have reliable sources. We didn't have reporting except in the people's stories. And the people would keep these stories alive. So given that, I was lucky enough to hear a version, and this is the version I wrote. It seemed to fit with what I knew about the history and the context of small town south of San Antonio, out in the ranch country of that time period. It fit with the rest of the stories and the behaviors that were being seen. So I didn't leave anything out. I just followed the wave.
Questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. Natalia.
I'm really interested in how when she passes, she becomes animal and not spirit, donkey, right? And I'm thinking about the hierarchy of animals. You know, is horse lady as scary as donkey or rabbit? What strikes you about the choice of donkey as opposed to maybe another animal in the way she's portrayed in the fear factor?
Well, a donkey is maligned a lot. Nobody says, oh, what a beautiful donkey. A donkey is common. In that time period, a lot of people had donkeys instead of horses because horses were more expensive. And donkeys were sturdy and they lasted and they could do the hard work, they could pull. They were ornery, but you put up with it, you know. And the donkey also isn't renowned for doing what other people want it to do. So there's a sense of, I think the donkey lady spoke to people because the braying of a donkey, I don't know how many of you hear donkeys frequently. Yeah, it's you know, sometimes it's not a hee-haw like what we hear on TV. It's not hee-haw. It's usually, you know, it's the snorting. You know, it's an angry sound. It's an angry, ugly sound, but it's a sound of, I am not going to move just because you have that carrot in front of me. You know, I'm sitting here till I'm good and ready to move. And I think that spoke to people because it was a form of resistance. You think of a horse and you think elegant, docile, trainable, friendly, you know, and a donkey is common, or at least was common in those days, is everyday, poor, and outspoken, even if they don't speak English.
Did you want to add something to that, Thelma?
No, I was agreeing with you. It's a hard-working animal. And so are we.
Yes.
Burros.
Somos burros, no somos burros. Another question here, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm not from here, but I've heard this story before. I'm just curious how many people here had an experience there.
Good question. Raise your hands high if you've heard the story before.
Well, not heard the story, but been there and had an experience.
Oh.
Been scared.
At the Donkey Lady
I've
Bridge.
heard somebody that has. I know somebody that has experienced something.
How many people have gone to the Donkey Lady Bridge?
Ooh, yeah.
There's quite a few.
Anybody been at the Donkey Lady Bridge and heard her?
We did a presentation at the World Heritage Center. That was the first one. The book had just come out May 28th, right? And it was an interesting presentation, you know. But now I forgot where I was going to go with that. Let's
There
just
was a
take
sense
another.
of ownership. Did
I'll
you
think
feel
about
that?
it in a minute.
There were a lot of people there from the South Side, and there was a sense of ownership, of reclaiming, of, yeah, that's my story, but we were being told it in ways that didn't make sense, and this makes sense. And that made me feel like anytime you can empower readers, anytime you can make people feel like they have a right to reclaim their heritage, that they don't have to match somebody else, it's okay to be different. So it's an empowerment of people anyone who's ever been criticized for being different, for not fitting the norm, for anybody who's ever said, okay, so whatever they're saying about me, they're saying about me, but what they say, what they think isn't as important as what I know. I'm me, and I have a right to be me. So that was the intention, was to allow the empowerment of everyone to be who they are. and to not be judged by a community that may be motivated by greed rather than justice.
I think we have time for a couple of more questions. Yes, ma'am, back there.
Yes, I'm curious. In your research, did you do that research of the property owner, trying to identify who this woman was? You know the area, you know the bridge. So there's records that go way back in our county courthouse. Have y'all tried to identify who the homeowner was back in those days? Like I live in a home that was built in 1928. So there are records that can be found. I'm just curious if you dug that deep to find out who the homeowner was or who the dog lady was.
No, we haven't. That would be a great thing to look into, just out of curiosity. And you know, it's hard to pinpoint it to a place, because even though I think that the Donkey Lady Bridge is where Google Maps will take you, I also know that with folklore, things shift a bit. I mean, my father grew up on the west side. He was born on Jean Street, and he took me to Jean Street and pointed to a building that had the bars on the windows and was all closed up and run down. And he said, that's the place donde la muchacha bailó con el diablo, you know. And that's a legend that's all over Mexico and the southwest of the U.S., you know, so I know that it probably didn't happen on Jean Street in San Antonio, but when people reclaim things, it becomes very important for them to have an expression of it. So that bar was closed down for some reason at some point before he noticed the building growing up all closed up. So I don't know if he was told by others or he assumed that was where la muchacha bailó con el diablo. That's where the girl danced with the devil, and you know, but that story is told everywhere. So I'd like to honor the dignity of people who claim a legend because of its meaning for them. But in this instance, since this is not an everywhere story, La Llorona is known very widely. I mean, they have written records of La Llorona going down the street screaming in an indigenous language, ay mis hijos, in Mexico City in the 1500s before the arrival of the Spaniards, right? So that one is like spread everywhere. The Angelito stories, the Muchacha que bailó con el diablo, all of these stories are kind of common to Mexican-American culture and sometimes further out. But the Donkey Lady is Southside San Antonio. That's where it comes from, and that's where I have to believe it happened.
I think we have time for one more question or comment.
I just wanted to follow up. Sitting here, San Antonio didn't have a fire department officially until 1891. So fire records could go back as far as that. I put in a call to the fire chief. She's going to look into it on Monday. But if the records aren't there about a fire on the south side between 1890 and 1935, then the next step would be to look at death records in the area to see if there was a woman that burned in the fire during that time.
Except that the same thing is what happened with the other story I talked about the young man who was killed. If the fire was her house, it was nobody else's house. It was out in the country. It was not in San Antonio city limits. The chances of it being reported or recorded grow slimmer. There's not going to be a hospital record of a person dying at the hospital, and people who died at home often weren't recorded. People who were born at home weren't always recorded. So we're living in a time period now where everything's recorded and on a cell phone by the person, you know, sitting across the street from you. But at that time, the only record was in the legends that the people told. And it seemed that the versions that I heard anyway, and the versions that the elder people that I talked to recounted, were horrified. They were struck by it. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to tell you a spooky story. It wasn't a story. They said, no, esta mujer, this woman was hurt. She was burnt. She was burnt horribly. And they were horrified when they said it to me, and that was in the 1950s. And you know how much stories can change in a couple of weeks, much less, 20, 30 years. So I don't know. But I thank you. Let me know what comes out of that.
All right, we're going to take one final question here.
When you speak of the South Side, and you said it's W.W. White Road, would you consider that the Southeast Side? Or is that,
And it's not in San Antonio. It's
yes, but the
south
South
at
Side
that
was,
time.
I understand was considered like all the way out Tampa, and this South Side. But would that be considered the Southeast?
No, it's not in the county. Floresville, on the way to Floresville, right?
Would Floresville be considered?
No.
Well, there's definitely
It's
south.
Rancho. It's
Southeast.
Rancho. Yeah. No, I don't think that Southeast is part of Bexar County. That
No.
part's Southeast.
Highway 60.
Applewhite Road.
But out, far out, yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
going towards Floresville, so that would be Southwest.
And the legend of the donkey lady is spread pretty far, not just with San Antonianos, even though it's based here on the south side of San Antonio. Yeah.
When we say South Side, San Antonio has grown a lot. So the city proper was a lot smaller then. So this was out in the country. So when you're saying South Side, we're now referring to what was south of San Antonio, nearby San Antonio, but south of.
Even in the 60s, that was called rural area.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I want to thank all of y'all for making this a very special National Book Launch Tardeada for the Donkey Lady, a graphic parable. I know I have a lot of friends out there, Dr. Tomas Ibarra Frausto, and Natalia Trevino, Hector Saldaña. There a lot of friends here. Thank you for coming out. My sister's here, and my sister-in-law, former sister-in-law, and cousins. Thanks again to the Esperanza. Thank you to Carmen and to Thelma for a beautiful story. I think one that's going to stand the test of time. Right now, we're going to have Thelma and Carmen signing over here at the table. If you haven't purchased your book, you can form a line, maybe right here, coming this way.
Yeah.
And just leave a little space so people that can buy their books, and then the signing table's over there. We're also going to have, there's some food that's available. Help yourself. My cousin Armando Tejeda and I are going to be performing some reception music for you. We're going to take a couple of minutes to